Come on.
Samsara dava nalalida loka Pranaya karanya ganaganatvam
Samsara dava nalalida loka Pranaruna danadanatam
Raptasya kalyana gananavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Raptasakalyana Gunanavasa Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Mahaprabhu Kirtanitya Gita Vadita Madhyan Manasora Sena
Mahaprabhu Kirtananita Gita Vaditra Madhyam Manasara Sena
Romanchakampa Shritaranga Bhajo Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Manchakampa Sutaranga Bhaja Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Shri Vigrahara Dhananityanamna Shingaratan Mandir Majanado
Shri Vigrahara Dhananityanamna Shingaratan Mandira Mandanado
Yukta Sabatam Shani Unjatopi Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Yukta Sabatam Sani Unjatopi Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Chaturvidashi Bhagavad Prasada Swadhana Triptan Haribhakta Sangha
Chaturvidasi Bhagavad Prasada Satana Traptan Haribhakta Sangha
Kritaiva Triptim Bhajata Sadaiva Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Tasava Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Shri Radhika Madhavayora Para Madhurya Lila Guna Rupa Namna
Shri Radhika Madhavayara Param Madhura Lila Guna Rupanamna
Pratikshana Svadanalupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Pratikshana Svadanalupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Nikunjayuna Ratikali Siddhai Yaya Libir Yuktir Apikshaniya
Nikunjayona Ratikali Siddhai Jaya Liviro Kirapetaniya
Tachati Daksha Rativalabhasya Vande Guru Shri Naravindam
Tatra Tiraka Ativalabhasa Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Sakshadaretvena Samasta Shastre Uktastataba Vyateva Sadvi
Vena Samasta Shashri Tattatava Dattaiva Sari
Kintu Prabhurya Priya Tasya Vande Guru Shri Shayanaravinda.
Kintu Prabhurya Priya Tasya Vande Guru Shri Shayanaravinda.
Yasya Prasada Bhagavad Prasada Yasya Prasada Nagati Kutapi.
Yasha Prasada Bhagavad Prasada Yasha Prasada Nagati Kutapi.
Jayam Subham Sasya Yasya Sandhyam Vande Guru Shri Shayanaravinda.
Jayam Subham Sasya Yasya Prasada Vande Guru Shri Shayanaravinda.
Vande Guru Shri Shayanaravinda. Vande Guru Shri Shayanaravinda.
Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda. Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda.
Nama Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine.
Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine.
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vasyacha Deshatarine.
Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vasyacha Deshatarine.
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta-vrinda.
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta-vrinda.
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta-vrinda.
Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta-vrinda.
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Bol. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
चलेगा। नमामीश्वरं सच्चिदानन्दरूपं लसत्कुण्डलं गोकुले व्रजमानम्
Namamishwaram Satchit Anandarupam
नमामीश्वरं सच्चिदानन्दरूपं लसत्कुण्डलं गोकुले व्रजमानम्
Namamishwaram Satchit Anandarupam Lasat Kundalam Gokule Brajamana
यशोदाभियोलोकलादवमानम् परां वृष्ठमत्यन्तदोद्धृत्य गोप्य
Yashodabiyalokala Param Vishvam Atyantatodrautagopya
रुदन्तमुहुर्नेत्रयुग्मं मृजन्तम् कराम्बुजयुग्मेन सातङ्कनेत्रम्
Rudantamunnaitam Jumamijantam Karambujajumaina Satankanetam
मुहुश्वासकं पात्रिरेतककण्ठ स्थितं देवं दामोदरं भक्तिबद्धम्
Osasakampatirekanta Stitam Gribam Damodara Bhaktivadam
इति दृक्ष्वलीलाभिरानन्दकुण्डे स्वघोषमिमाजन्तम् आख्यापयन्तम्
Salilave Ananda Kunde Swagosam Nimayantam Akyapayantam
तदीयेषु तज्ञेषु भक्तिर्जितत्वम् पुनः प्रेमतस्तं शतावृत्ति वन्दे
Kadiyestitagesho Bhaktajitattam Puna Prematastam Sattaviti Vande
वरं देवमोक्षं न मोक्षवदिं वा न चान्यं वृणेऽहं वरेषदपीह
Varam Deva Moksham Na Moksham Vadimba Nachanya vireyam varasadapiya.
Idam tena purnatha gopalabalam sada vimanashyami ashanki manni.
Idam te vapurnata gopalabalam vimanasya virastakimane.
Idam te mukhambujam atyanta nilay vrutam kundalai snigdha rakshasha gopya. Mushumbitam bimba raktadaram me manashavirastram malam lakshalabhe.
Shumbitam bimba raktadaram
Namo Deva Damodar Ananta Vishnu Prasida Prabhu Dukha Jala Vimagnam.
Namo Deva Damodar Ananta Vishnu Prasida Prabhu Dukha Jala Vimagnam.
Kripa Drishti Vrishtyate Dinam Batanu Grihani Shamamadhyami Dashi Drishyai.
Kripa Drishti Vrishtyate Dinam Batanu Dani Shamamadhyami Dashi Drishyai.
Kuveratma Jaubhadva Murtvaiva Yadvat Tvaya Mochitau Bhakti Bhajau Krutau Cha.
Kuvera Majo Bada Mote Bajata Bhakti Bhakta Priyota.
Tatha Prema Bhaktim Sakami Prayacha Namo Shigraho Mesti Damodareya.
Ata Prema Bhaktim Sakam Payacha Namo Kigam Damodareya.
Namaste Stu Dhamne Stu Radhipi Dhamne Tvadiyo Darayata Vishwasya Dhamne.
Namaste Studamne Spuraditi Damne Tvaya Jadata Vishwasadamne.
Namo Radhikayai Tvadiya Priyayai Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tobhyam.
Namo Radhikaya Tadiya Priyaya Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tobhyam.
Namo Radhikayai Tvadiya Priyayai Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tobhyam.
Namo Nantalilaya Devaya.
Namo Radhikayai Tvadiya Priyayai Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tobhyam.
Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tobhyam.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jayo Radha Damodar, Damodar Shri Radhe.
Jaya Radha, Damodar Radha, Damodar Radha, Damodar Shri Radhe.
Jayo Radha Nila Madhav Shri Radhe.
Jaya Radha,
Jayo Jagannatha, Jayo Baladeva, Jayo Subhadra, Jayo Sudarshana.
Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadrama, Jaya Sudansha Chakra.
Jayo Sita Ram Lakshman Bhakta Hanuman, Jayo Sita Ram, Jayo Lakshman Hanuman.
Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Lakshmi Hanuman, Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Lakshmi Hanuman.
Jayo Lakshmi Narasingha, Jayo Lakshmi Narasingha, Jayo Lakshmi Narasingha, Jayo Lakshmi Narasingha.
Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha.
Jayo Gauranitai, Jayo Gauranitai, Jayo Gauranitai, Jayo Gauranitai.
Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai.
Jayo Jayo Prabhupada, Jayo Jayo Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Jayo Jayo Gurudev, Jayo Jayo Gurudev.
Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Jaya Vishnupad Param Saprabha Jagacharya Suttara Sarashishimat Iskon Pratishta Viviti Samstapakacharya Vaishnava Siromani Gaur Priyajana Krishna Prema Bhakti Datta Patita Pavana. His Divine Grace Abhacharvinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Shri Prabhupada Ji Ki Jai, Shri Gaurya Guru Varga Patita Udhar Ki Jai, Shri Rup Sanatana Bhatra Gunath Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Guna Sat Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai, Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ji Ki Jai, Ananta Kuru Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री द्वैत गदाधर शिवासारि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। परम दयाल नित्यानंद प्रभु की जय। प्रेम नाम संकीर्तन के जनक प्रेम पुरुषोत्तम सच्चिदानंद श्रीमान गुरु चैत्र महाप्रभु गौर हरि महावरनाय अवतार की जय। श्री कार्तिक मास व्रत की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण को गोपीनाथ राधा कुंज श्याम कुंज गिरिराज गोवर्धन की जय। श्री ब्रजभूमि वृंदावन मथुरा धाम की जय। मायापुर नवद्वीप के चक्र धाम की जय। श्री पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय। श्री गंगा माँ जमुना माई की जय। तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी भक्ति देवी की जय। भक्ति सर्वविघ्न विनाशन करुण सिंह भगवान की जय। निताय गौरी परमानंदे। All glory to the assembled bodies. All glory to the assembled bodies. All glory to the assembled bodies. Yashoda Namodar ki jai.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Daine. Hiranyakashipu Rakshaha. Shilatangkanakalaye.
Jaya Shilatangkanakalaye.
Hito Narsimha Parato Narsimha.
Hito Nisingha Parato Nisingha.
Yato Yato Yami Tato Narsimha.
Jaya Datta Datta Jami Tato Nisingha.
Bahir Narsimha Hridaye Narsimha.
Bahir Nisingha Hridaye Nisingha.
Narasimha Madim Sharanam Prapadye.
Narasingha Madim Sharanam Prapadye.
Tava Kara Kamalavare Nakam Adbhuta Shingam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanu Bringam Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare.
Adbhuta Shingha Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanu Bringam Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare.
Oh Jaya Narsimha Dev, Jaya Narsimha Dev, Jaya Narsimha Dev, Jaya Narsimha Dev. Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj.
Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva.
Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva, Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva.
Nita Gora Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nita Gora Hari भगवान की, श्री प्रहलाद महाराज की।
जय। श्री वृंदाई तुलसी देवाई प्रिय के सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रादे देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः। वृंदाई तुलसी देवाई प्रिय के सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रादे देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः। वृंदाई तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के सब सत्य कृष्ण भक्ति प्रादे देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः। जय श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंदा देवी की। Haribo, want to sing Tulsi? Yeah. Okay.
नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः
तुलसी प्रेयसी
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो एई अभिलाषी
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो एई अभिलाषी।
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो एई अभिलाषी
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो एई अभिलाषी।
जे तोमार शरण लोय तारा वंचा पूर्ण हो
तुम्हारा शरण लागो तारा बंचा पूर्णा।
कृपा कोरी कोरो तारे वृंदावन वासी
तुम्हें कृपा कोरी करण करे वृंदावन
मोराए विलास कुंजे दियो बा
मोराए विलास कुंज दियो
सदा युगलरू परासी
अमिनायाने दिवसदा युगलरू परासी
এই নিবেদন ধর সাকিরানুগত করো সেবাধিকার দিয়ে করো নিজ দাসী দীন কৃষ্ণ দাস কোয়ে এই নমোর হই শ্রী রাধা গোবিন্দ প্রেমে সদাই নবাসী শ্রী রাধা গোবিন্দ প্রেমে সদাই নবাসী तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः
तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राण शांति प्रदक्षिणा पादे पादे
जनिकानि पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि तानि तानि प्राणसन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पादे पादे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राण शांति प्रदक्षिणा पादे पादे
जनिकानि पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि तानि तानि प्राणसन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पादे पादे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणक्षन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पादे पादे
जनिकानि पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि तानि तानि प्राणसन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पादे पादे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्राणक्षन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पादे पादे
जनिकानि पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि तानि तानि प्राणसन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पादे
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
कृष्णा कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jayo Tulsi Maharani, Jayo Tulsi Maharani, Jayo Tulsi Maharani, Jayo Tulsi Maharani. Jayo Tulsi Maharani, Jayo Tulsi Maharani, Jayo Tulsi Maharani, Jayo Tulsi Maharani. Jayo Vrinda Devi, Jayo Vrinda Devi, Jayo Vrinda Devi, Jayo Vrinda Devi. Jayo Vrinda Devi, Jayo Vrinda Devi, Jayo Vrinda Devi, Jayo Vrinda Devi. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Shri Vrindai Tulasi Devi Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Sattvatai Namo Namaha. Vrindai Tulasi Devi Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Sattvatai Namo Namaha. Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Sattvatai Namo Namaha. Jai Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki. Again and again. My desire to Shri Radha and Krishna. Whoever takes shelter of you has wishes fulfilled. Bestow your mercy upon him, you make him resident of Vrindavana. My desire is that you also grant me a residence in pleasure groves of Sri Vrindavan Dham. Thus, within my vision, I will always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower of Kavi damsels of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own maid servant. This very fallen and lowly servant of Krishna prays. May I always swim in love with Shri Radha and Govinda. Shri Mati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shikhastakam Ki Jai. Chaito Darpanam Ajanam Bhava Mahada Bhagni Nivapanam Shri Akari Vachandrika Vitaranam Vidya Vado Jivanam Anandam Buddhivardhanam Padipadam Purnamrita Sadhanam Sarvatmasnam Paramparam Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Bhavadhari Sarvashakti Tattva Shranena Kala Ita Krishitava Kripaya Bhagavan Mamapi Durdhaiva Midvishaya Janina Nuraga Gurorapi Saishnuna Amanadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitamba Jagadishakamayi Mama Janmani Janmanishwari Avata Bhaktirai Tukitwayi Oinanda Tanuja Kinkaram Paritamam Vishame Bhavam Buddho Kripaya Tava Pada Pankaja Titaduli Sadrisham Vichintaya Nayanam Galorashrudharaya Badanam Gadagadharudaya Gira Purakai Nishitam Bapukada Tavanama Grahane Bhavisyati Juga Itam Nimishena Chakusha Prarusa Itam Shunya Itam Jagati Sarvam Govinda Virahiname Asli Shava Padaratam Pinastumam Adarsanad Marmahatam Karoduva Jatatatava Vidadhatulam Pato Matpranatastu Saivana Paraha Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Siksastakam ki jai. Namo Mahavarannaya Krishna Prema Pradayati. Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namine Gauratvishe Namo. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale. Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devam Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunnavadi Vachatari Satarine. Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years, and extinguishes the fire of conditioned life of the period of birth and death. This Sankirtan moment is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which all is anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda.
In these transcendental names, you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names, but I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than a straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda, Krishna, I am your eternal servitor, yet somehow or other I have fallen to this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death, and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up, and when will the hairs of my body stand on end at the recitation of your holy name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I am feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and he shall remain so even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Siksastakam Ki Jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vestaya Bhuttiri Samadhi Bhakti Vinata Swamita. Namaste Saraswati Devi Guru Varachani Nivasesa Sunyavani Paskati Prajatam. There are 10 offenses in a matter of chanting holy names of the Lord that should be avoided, and they are as follows. 1. To blaspheme the devotees who have dedicated their lives to propagating holy names of the Lord. 2. To consider the names of demigods like Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma to be equal to independent names of Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the orders of the spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the Vedic literature or literature in pursuance of the Vedic version. 5. To consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna as imagination. 6. To give some interpretation on the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider the chanting of Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in the Vedas as fruitive activities or karma kanda. 9. To instruct the faithless person about the glories of the holy name. And 10, to not have complete faith in chanting holy names, and to maintain material attachments, even after understanding so many instructions in this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success, Krishna Prema. Now let's offer our most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are just like desired trees that can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they're full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vanchakalpa turabhyascha, kripa sindhubhyavcha, patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Vaishnava Thakur ki jai. So today being a Sunday, I wanted to give a special talk, especially because it's meant for the youth of our community, because everyone is studying math, science, biology, chemistry, things like that. So it's good to have a perspective of what are the limitations of these subjects and what goes way beyond these subjects but are not taught. And this is important because if the major time that we have on this earth is concerned with mundane topics, we will be eternally caught up in the cycle of birth and death. Now, unless we see the difference between the value of mundane knowledge and transcendental knowledge, we will remain always subject to the three miseries: miseries of this body, miseries caused by other bodies, and miseries caused by natural catastrophic events, and will always be limited by lust, anger, greed, etc., and will always be limited by time, and also will be limited by the modes of material nature. So it is impossible to be liberated while one is constricted by all these different things that slow us down, that limit our scope of understanding what is the real purpose of life and what is ignorance. So today I want to discuss a very interesting point, and that is the following points. It's called the list of impossible things to achieve, but people think they can succeed and achieve these things. So the first and foremost thing is people think that the species take place by evolution, as explained by Darwin or by modern geneticists. So this is something. I'm going to go through a list of things that people believe is possible, but they're all impossible, which shows that the knowledge that they're teaching today leads to a dead end. And that's not a pun, it's actually a fact. Dead means we'll be subject to dying rather than to living. And repeating that birth, old age, disease, and death process over and over again in different species of life. So, to think that the different species, and there are, as we know, 8,400,000, happened according to Darwin's explanation or the modern geneticists' explanation when they talk about DNA and RNA and all that stuff. So in the third canto, 5th chapter, 26th verse, and Prabhupada writes, Mother Nature, a mother material nature, cannot produce any living entity from her material elements unless and until she is impregnated with living entities by the Lord Himself. That is the mystery of the generation of the living entities. This impregnating process, performed by the first Purusha incarnation, Karana Vasai Vishnu, Karana Vasai Vishnu, simply by his glance over material nature, the whole matter is accomplished. And also in the Bhagavad Gita 17th chapter, 16th verse, it says, the more we think of sense enjoyment, the more the mind becomes dissatisfied. In the present age, we unnecessarily engage the mind in so many different ways for sense gratification, and so there's no possibility of the mind's becoming satisfied. We should not understand the process of impregnation by the personality of Godhead in terms of our conception of sex. The omnipotent Lord can impregnate just by his eyes, and therefore he is called all-potent. So this is a very profound statement by Srila Prabhupada and the Vaishnava Acharyas. The idea that a single-celled amoeba came into existence by itself is nonsense. Nothing comes into existence by itself. Try it. You put some oxygen and hydrogen in a little receptor or a little dish and wait for it to combine, and you'll see it won't. You put anything, any matter, without any outside influence, mixed together, it will not combine into something that's living. So this is the theory of the scientists, that by some mysterious way, a single-celled amoeba was formed in some ancient time, and from that single cell, everything else came. This is complete nonsense. There's never been any experiment to prove it. The only experiment they did, and that's in the 19th century, was to using ammonia and some other reactive agents, they produced some amino acids. Now, amino acids are not living beings, but they are considered the building blocks of living beings. And that's it. They've never gone beyond that point up until today. So, and if you study the history of science, you'll see that from one point, all they're doing is saying, maybe it might be, perhaps it happened like this. And that's mostly in the 20th century now, because they discovered a few things from Darwin, not Darwin, from Isaac Newton up to Einstein. They discovered some things, basically only gravitation and electromagnetism. But since then, they haven't discovered anything. They're just going on what they found out about, mainly electromagnetism. Even gravity, they have some theories about it, but it's not solid theories. So here we see the idea that that life can organize itself. Matter can organize itself is completely bogus, and I'm going to give you examples of it in a second. Okay, so another thing that's impossible is to think that one can be happy by sense gratification. Now, the laws of nature are such that if you engage in sense gratification, it will be followed by misery. So now we have two big points. Number one is that the more we think of sense enjoyment, the more the mind becomes dissatisfied. And then number two is that when we engage in sense gratification, it is followed by misery. These 2 points are absolutely true, but no one accepts them. When I say no one, most people don't accept these 2 points. But they experience it over and over again. And therefore, that proves that it's impossible to gain happiness by sense gratification, and it's impossible to for matter to organize itself without any outside help. So most people believe that they can achieve things that are impossible to achieve, and therefore their life is wasted making these efforts to do that. Like, for example, people want to stop death and prolong life in the body. It's impossible to prolong life in the body because the body is destined to go through 4 stages that are regulated by laws of nature. And those laws of nature are made by Krishna. There's birth, there's old age, there's disease, and death. No one can stop this process. Do you know anyone that stopped this process? If you say Jesus, the Christian philosophy says Jesus died on the cross, and then later on, he resurrected. But I don't know anybody else that has done that. And it might even be not a fact that he resurrected. It may be that he went into a state of samadhi, and he appeared to be dead, and he came out of it and was alive. So there are a lot of things that are not sure, but we're being asked to believe them. Okay, so let's believe that Jesus did resurrect from the dead, but he did die. So that means he's under the control of the material nature. Like, for example, there are yogis that can prolong their life span from 100 years to 400 years. How do they do that? By controlling their breath. But they're still subject to death. Even Lord Brahma, who lives hundreds and millions of years, he also dies. So no one is going to escape the laws of material nature, birth, old age, disease, and death. But yet they're trying to do that. Google invested $1 billion in a company they started called Calico that's still going on. It's to stop death. So they're going to spend many, many years, make many promises that they're not going to be able to keep, spend huge amounts of money to try and do something that's impossible. In fact, if you look into history, you'll see that people have been trying to prolong life or attain eternal life through material processes. Like, for example, Vasco da Gama, who discovered Florida. Columbus discovered the West Indies. Vasco da Gama actually discovered Florida and let's say the American or the northern parts of the Western Hemisphere. What was he looking for? He wasn't looking for Florida. He was looking for the elixir of immortality. If you want to look him up right now, Vasco da Gama, you'll see. He thought that there was this elixir of immortality somewhere in the Western Hemisphere. And he sort of used some kind of logic or maybe some mystical realization. And he thought it was in this place of land called that we call Florida, but he never found it. He found Florida, but he didn't find the elixir or the water of immortality through a material process. Has been going on since the beginning of time, and no one has succeeded. Did you find Vasco da Gama? Okay. So number one, the idea that one can be happy by sense gratification, it's impossible, because sense gratification is always followed by misery. And also, if the second point is to think the species take place by evolution, like Darwin explains, or the modern geneticists, that also is nonsense. There's never been any proof of that. Now, the third thing, that matter can organize itself. Now, this is something that is vastly discussed today, and even in the Greeks also discussed this, because it's based on enviousness of God, and they want to prove that matter can organize itself. Now, I'm going to read a few things now. You can see these things on the internet. I'll tell you where you can look. And you'll see that even most people don't think that matter can organize itself. But there are many scientists that write big books about how they think that it may have happened, or it may be a fact that matter organizes itself. So, and I'm not going to read everything, but just going to read a few things here. There's a lady, she's a Canadian, and she's sitting on the fence. That means, in English, sometimes she might believe that matter organizes itself, but then by looking more deeply into the question and studying all the different books that have been written about it, she's not sure. And then she goes through a list of all the different scientists that have written books saying that matter can organize itself. And she points out that basically they're just speculating. They have not really the hard science to prove it. They have things that may suggest it, right, but not prove it. Okay, so let's hear her article a little bit. Self-organization. Can we wring, W-R-I-N-G, information from matter? Ring means not R-I-N-G, you ring a bell. Ring, W-R-I-G, means squeezing something to get something out of it, like this. You know, it's, you just squeeze something really hard. That's called ringing, right? So, but it's pronounced exactly like ring. So it says self-organization, colon. Can we wring information from matter? Shake the bit out of it. You see, she's being very sarcastic here. And this is what the scientists are trying to do. She says, current research assumes that life's origin must be a fully natural event. Okay, that's a buzzword or buzz phrase. Fully natural event means there's no God involved in it, right? And they use the word natural to make it seem as if it's good, right? Okay, so current research assumes that life's origin must be fully natural event. Did you find Vasco da Gama? What does it say about him?
Telling his overall journey.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Does it say he was looking for the elixir of immortality?
That part I didn't find, Maharaj. Yeah.
Okay, when you find that, you
say
read.
elixir of?
Immortality. Okay. Current research assumes that life's origins must be a fully natural event, whether it occurs due to an as yet unknown law of nature. Okay, what does that mean? As yet unknown law of nature, that means we don't know, right? Or by chance. Okay, but by chance, it means it happened haphazardly, and they don't know that either. You know, they're just speculating. The results are not a cause for celebration. In other words, don't think that we've done it, right? When you celebrate, that means you did something, right? So she says, the results are not a cause for celebration. Parentheses, RNA world. The current best accepted theory, okay, it's a theory, right? Theory does not mean it's fact. It means they're speculating. The current best accepted theory is simply a proposal that in the comparatively simple earliest life forms, RNA might have done DNA's job. So, okay, as soon as you start using these phrases, might have done, not as yet unknown law of nature, by chance, etc. This is all speculation, right? So if you go to a doctor and you have a pain in your heart, you say, doctor, tell me, is there something wrong with my heart? So he said, okay, well, we'll do a biopsy, we'll do a blood test, but it takes 6 weeks to get the results. Have you ever been in that situation where you hear it takes 6 weeks to get the results? Huh? Anybody? No? Yes? Okay. That's what usually happens when they try and do a full analysis of or diagnosis of what's wrong with you. So after 6 weeks, the doctor comes back. You're there 6 weeks you're in anxiety trying to figure out what's going to happen. And he tells you, well, it may be this and it may be that. So would you be satisfied? That's what they're saying. After 2,000 years, right? Let's say all this scientific research started and it got really intense from the 16th century on until today, and it's super intense now. It's on steroids. They're still talking about maybe, perhaps, by chance, as yet unknown law, right? So she's saying that the most current idea is that RNA might have done DNA's job. Now you have to understand what RNA is and DNA, right? So that's their trick. As soon as they get into a murky situation, they use terms and language that you don't understand. So you have to look those things up to see what they're talking about. But RNA must then have co-evolved with the proteins whose work it directs. As we saw earlier, the thesis has been called by rival theorists everything from absurd to imagination, to the equivalent of a gorilla preparing a coherent chili con carne recipe. In other words, do gorillas make dal? You tell me. Have you ever seen a gorilla who can cook dal? Right? So, in other words, she's saying it's nonsense, right? Their RNA theory. So, she says then, rivals indulge in ridicule when they have little to fear from the rejoinder. In other words, they people who are rivals of this matter organizes itself, make fun and say nasty things about the theories of the so-called scientists who want to prove that matter organizes itself, because they know that they can't give an answer. Therefore, they're not worried about what the others are going to write to defend themselves, because it's going to be just a bunch of maybes and perhapses. Right? University of Chicago cell biologist James Shapiro offers a different, conceptually more attractive approach, a 21st century theory of evolution as he terms it. Right? He proposes that life forms can in fact organize themselves. He writes, living cells and organisms are cognitive or sentient entities that act and interact purposefully to ensure survival, growth, and proliferation. They possess corresponding sensory, communication, information processing, and decision-making capabilities. In other words, he's talking about living cells. He didn't talk yet about how dead matter becomes a living cell, right? Okay, fine, James. All that you said is true, right? But you didn't explain how the matter becomes a living cell. But can one now she's writing again, but can one properly use terms like cognitive or purposefully apart from demonstrated intelligence? And how does he think living cells and organisms began to exhibit such qualities? She's pointing out what James is saying here, James Shapiro. He's just describing what he's seeing in nature, but he hasn't explained how it happened. Right? Then, so then she says, self-organization theory in general is fuzzy on how a life form gains the intelligence to organize itself. Well, fuzzy means nonsense, right? Have you heard the word fuzzy? See, when they use words like this is slang. This is not even proper English, right? Because she's making fun. She uses a slang word to make fun of the so-called PhD physicists and biologists, right? She says, self-organization theory in general is fuzzy on how a life form gains the intelligence to organize itself. So years ago, Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, who was called Dr. Singh, was getting his PhD in the University of California in Southern California, in Anaheim, the Anaheim campus. And he, at that time, was becoming Krishna conscious. So he was living in the Los Angeles temple, and Prabhupada was there, and he was hearing a lecture from Prabhupada. And he had told Prabhupada before the lecture that a very big biologist, scientist was coming to the campus in Anaheim to talk about talk about nature creating itself living entities. So Prabhupada said to him, okay, I want you to ask a question from that big man. He said, ask him, if you claim everything comes from chemicals, which is what that was the theory of the person that was going to speak. He said, if I give you all the chemicals, can you produce a living being or one-celled living entity? So Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, or Dr. Singh, he went to that lecture, and after the lecture was over, the expert said, are there any questions? And he raised his hand. He said, sir, thank you very much for your lecture. You claim that chemical evolution is the origin of all life. Is that right? He said, yes. He said, if I give you all the chemicals right now, can you produce a living being? Or can you produce a one-celled amoeba, for example? He said, no. After giving a whole lecture and writing many books about chemical evolution, he asked him a simple question, Prabhupada's question, right? And the man said, no. He said, this is the nonsense that's going on today. It's still going on today. They have not proven, and then people are writing about it, that this is complete nonsense. These are just fabricated theories without any solid proof. They always say, well, we did this and it looks something like what we want, but not exactly. So let's hear what this lady from Canada says about that. See, now today you're a student. Let's say you're a student in school and you're studying biology and you're studying DNA and RNA and genetics and things like that. You're assuming that what they're telling you is science. But in reality, it's not science. It's stories that they've made up with a few experiments that seem to point to what they want, but have never proven it. Now, will you realize that? Not necessarily, because it would take you years to realize that the truth about what's actually being taught. Because you're just trying to study things, and memorize things and pass tests. But actually, what they're teaching you has never been proven scientifically. Science means there's experimentation, there's recognition of a pattern that has some predictability, and when that predictability goes up to 51%, it becomes a scientific theory. Not that it's 100% predictable. So here she continues. Self-organization theory in general is fuzzy on how a life form gains the intelligence to organize itself. One of the best-known theorists, Stuart Kauffman, has described his work as alchemy, a term that famously resists specifics. I guess she's making fun of these guys. These are big PhDs. Some of them have Nobel Prizes, right? But she says that he says it's alchemy. Now, alchemy is not considered science. What is alchemy? For many, many years in the Middle Ages, people were looking to find the elixir of immortality, and they were mixing dangerous chemicals together and tasting it, and oftentimes dying, to find this elixir of immortality. So look up the word alchemy, A-L-C-H-E-M-Y. and see what it means. Did you find
So Maharaj,
the first one?
so Chaitanya Sundar Prabhu searched. This is some.
Lon said, yeah, go ahead.
It's about Ponence de Leon.
Yeah, Ponce de Leon. Go ahead.
Instead of. 1 second.
Does it say he was looking for the elixir of immortality?
So it says the elixir of life, also known as elixir of immortality, and sometimes equated with the name philosopher's stone.
Philosopher's stone. That means the philosopher's stone. Whatever touches it turns into gold. Right. So if you know that story about Sanatana Goswami and the Shiva Bhakta who goes to see him, and he wants to have the Chintamani, the stone that whatever you touch it to, it turns to gold. So in English they call it the philosopher's stone. Go ahead. Okay, anyway, yeah, that's it. He was looking for the elixir of immortality. All right. What does alchemy mean?
Can you spell Maharaj one more time? L.
The medieval forerunner of chemistry based on the supposed transformation of matter.
Wait a minute, you have to speak in a microphone. Hold the microphone near your mouth.
The medieval forerunner of chemistry.
Okay, it's the forerunner. That means before modern chemistry, there was alchemy. Go ahead.
Based on the supposed transformation of matter. It was concerned particularly with attempts to convert base metals into gold or to find a universal elixir.
There you go. Universal elixir means something that can heal all sickness and give you immortality. So you see, this has been going on for a long time. You have the Ponce de Leon, now you have Middle Ages, early Middle Ages and later Middle Ages, people engaging in alchemy, mixing dangerous chemicals together and tasting it, and oftentimes they would die, looking for this special potion that can give you eternal life. Right? So then this guy, Stuart Kaufman, he describes his work as alchemy, a term that famously resists specifics. This is like they're making fun, and she's making fun of these guys as if they're idiots, right? A term that David H. Koch, wealthy chemist and funder of TV evolution documentaries, tries to help by explaining. It's a deeper approach to understanding evolution. They're not kooky ideas. The concept of self-assembly, for instance, where you put certain chemicals into a beaker or test tube and shake it up, and vesicles form. This is this man's writing. He's a PhD, and he's writing this. And you see, whenever they're on very shaky ground, they start using slang, right? So he says, they're not kooky ideas. That means they are kooky ideas, right? So then she continues to write, at times it happens. Last October, one group of researchers reported that fatty chemicals formed a primitive version of a cell membrane and got the chemicals close enough to react in a highly specific manner. I mean, it didn't happen. She said it was close enough, right? Now she quotes, computer calculations reveal that even by chance, the 5 liposomes in 1,000 could not have trapped all 83 molecules of the assembly. Their calculated probability for even one such liposome to form is essentially 0. So our scientist, Dr. Thompson, I have to think of his devotee name. He was also a member of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. He's one of the founders of it with Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj. And he wrote a book, and I gave him the money to write that book. This is a long time ago, where he proved mathematically that it's impossible to just put chemicals together or materials together and form a living being. It's mathematically impossible. And that book is still around, And he made a lot of also videos about the structure of the universe. I don't know if any of you have seen those videos. They're all over the internet. He was a brilliant scientist and mathematician, and he was a devotee of Prabhupada. And he wrote this book and proved mathematically, and it's the same thing that they're saying here. Their calculated probability for even one such liposome to form is essentially 0. Then she continues writing. So they concluded self-assembly into simple cells may be an inevitable physical process. Maybe, right? Now that's a leap. A 2014 article in Chemical Reviews surveying the field to date, the field of how matter organizes itself, right, notes that even the simplest microorganisms known on Earth are breathtakingly complex, with the result that the probability of a random series of events of physics and chemistry leading to a bacterium, meaning a living cell, by spontaneous self-organization of biochemicals is negligibly low. In other words, it's impossible. Right. Now, a lot of you kids are in school. Do they teach you that matter can organize itself? How about you, Krishna?
No, Maharaj. They just go about, like, they don't go into the specifics of those.
But do they say it's possible, or that's the way things happen?
Not that I can remember for now.
What do they say? What are they teaching you?
They just talk about the matter. I did it a long time ago in biology and chemistry, but they just talk about like matter and how it like forms and it's in everything and stuff.
Well, they're how it forms, right?
Yeah.
So how did they say it formed? Did they mention God or?
I mean, I can't remember, so it must have not been that emphasized on, but maybe they touched over it. I don't know.
You don't remember. Anybody else? Okay, the adults. You went to school. Yes. Well, that's non-answer. How did the very first life come about? You see, they don't know. The most important thing, they don't know. But after that, life comes from life, right?
Everything after that, they say like life only comes from life, but the very first life was somehow spontaneous.
What did you say, bro? See, they don't know.
But then they also say that God has no hand in it, like it's entirely.
Right, there's no God anyway. It's all nonsense. That's what the Hare Krishnas believe in. They're nonsense too.
We spent the first day of the unit talking about like whether or not God had anything to do with this, and they were like, no, there's no way that.
You see? That's what they're learning in school. There's no God. Right? You're sending your kids to schools where they're teaching. That's not that they don't talk about it. They talk about it, that there's no God. So how can you send your kid to a school where they're going to teach them and insist that there's no God? You see my point? I'm not making it up. Sometimes people are, oh, Hari Vilas is always talking about this. Why is he talking about it? He should talk about Krishna and Vaikuntha. Don't talk about it. Because your kids are being poisoned every day. That's why I'm talking about it. Okay. So, I'm not going to beat the beast to death, but you get the idea that they don't know, and they claim that they know, right? But when you press them, they tell you, well, we don't know for sure. We don't know how the first cell came into existence. But after that, life comes from life, right? Okay, so the next thing that they claim is possible, that is impossible. They think scientific advancement of material science can eventually produce a living being. Okay, so that's basically the same as matter can self-organize itself. But if it self-organizes itself into one cell, how did that one cell become a human being? Well, they think that it's possible. It's impossible. Not only the first cell doesn't come into being by itself, but that one cell doesn't develop into a human being. Okay. And Laws of Nature, there's a book by Prabhupada. On page 1, Prabhupada says, the material energy is duratyaya, impossible to overcome by material means. Renunciation through wisdom, page 4, says, nature's stringent laws are impossible to overcome. And in Bhagavad Gita 3:33, therefore, even for the most highly, Prabhupada says, even for the most highly educated person on the mundane plane, it is impossible to get out of the entanglement of Maya simply by theoretical knowledge or by separating the soul from the body. There are many so-called spiritualists who outwardly pose as advanced in science, but inwardly or privately are completely under the particular modes of nature which they are unable to surpass. Academically, one may be very learned, but because of his long association with material nature, he is in bondage. Now, Prabhupada writes in 3rd chapter, 34th verse, unrestricted sense enjoyment is the cause of material engagement. And in Srimad Bhagavatam 7.9.18, Prabhupada writes in translation and purport, by following in the footsteps of the great acharyas, one associates with the hamsas or paramahansas, those who are completely freed from material contamination. Indeed, by following the instructions of the acharyas, one is always freed from all material contamination, and thus one's life becomes successful, for one reaches the goal of life. That is, going back to Godhead. The material world is miserable, regardless of one's standard of life. Of this there is no doubt. Attempts to mitigate the miseries of material existence by material methods will never be successful. One must take to Krishna consciousness to become really happy. Otherwise, happiness is impossible. And in Bhagavad Gita 7.14, Prabhupada writes, one might say that becoming advanced in spiritual life also involves tapasya, voluntary acceptance of some inconvenience. However, such inconvenience is not as dangerous as material attempts to mitigate all miseries. That's exactly what the scientists are trying to do. They're trying to find material ways to mitigate all miseries of life, and it's impossible. For example, every day, almost every day, you'll find some article in the newspaper saying, new breakthrough in science. Right? And they say, well, yeah, the scientists have studied this plant, and it has very great promise, but don't take it yet. We have not completely verified that it's a fact. So every day they announce a new breakthrough in science, but then they mitigate it by saying, but don't do it, try it now, because it has not been thoroughly researched yet. You know, so this is their tricks. They're very tricky people. They're always announcing success when there's no success. We, the living entities, belong to the eternal superior nature of Krishna, but due to contamination by the inferior nature, matter, our illusion is also eternal. That means, because we have an eternal soul, we can be eternally liberated or eternally conditioned by birth, death, old age, and disease, because our soul is eternal. In other words, you can go eternally in the material world suffering birth, old age, disease, and death if you refuse to be educated by Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita. We, the living entities, belong to the eternal superior nature of Krishna, but due to contamination by the inferior nature, matter, our illusion is also eternal. The conditioned soul is therefore called Nityabhada, or eternally conditioned. No one can trace out the history of his becoming conditioned at a certain date in material history. Consequently, his release from the clutches of material nature is very difficult, meaning it's impossible, even though that material nature is an inferior energy, because the material energy is ultimately conducted by the supreme will, which the living entity cannot overcome. So no material means of controlling nature or defeating the laws of nature will ever succeed. But yet, they're trying. Just like to think that one can control and exploit material nature. It's impossible. But yet they're promising to do it sometime in the future. And then it says, the third canto, 15th chapter, 23rd verse. The purport, it says, in the purport it says, it is very much regrettable that unfortunate people do not discuss the description of the Vaikuntha planets, but engage in topics which are unworthy to hear and which bewilder one's intelligence. Those who give up the topics of Vaikuntha and take to talk of the material world are thrown into the darkest region of ignorance. There it is right there. By going to school and hearing this nonsense called scientific theories, what happens? Those who give up the topics of Vaikuntha and take to talk of the material world are thrown into the darkest region of ignorance. Now, do we believe this? There's a verse also in the Ishopanishad, Andam Tamaha Pravisanti, that those who engage in material science go to the darkest region of ignorance, and worse still are those who deny the personality of Godhead, the Mayavadis. They're worse than the modern scientists, right? The Mayavad philosophy. So, that's the 9th verse or mantra of the Ishopanishad. So it says here, the most unfortunate persons are the impersonalists who cannot understand the transcendental variegatedness of the spiritual world. They are afraid to talk about the beauty of the Vaikuntha planets because they think that variegatedness must be material. Such impersonalists think that the spiritual world is completely void, or in other words, that there is no variegatedness. Now, unfortunately, most of the Hindus are impersonalists. They're worse than the material scientists, and even worse than that, they're material scientists and impersonalists, right? That means they are on the lowest rung of intelligence. The philosophies of voidness and of the impersonal situation of the spiritual world are condemned here because they bewilder one's intelligence. How can the impersonalist and the void philosopher think of this material world, which is full of variegatedness, and then say that there's no variegatedness in the spiritual world? It is said that this material world is the perverted reflection of the spiritual world. So unless there is variegatedness in the spiritual world, how can there be temporary variegatedness in the material world? That one can transcend this material world does not imply that there is no transcendental variegatedness. You see how Prabhupada is very logical, right? And he's starting always with the known to understand the unknown, right? Here in the Bhagavatam, in this verse particularly, it is stressed that people who try to discuss and understand the real spiritual nature of the spiritual sky and the Vaikunthas are fortunate. The variegatedness of the Vaikuntha planets is described in relation to the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. But instead of trying to understand the spiritual abode and the spiritual activities of the Lord, people are more interested in politics and economic developments. They hold many conventions, meetings, and discussions to solve the problems of this worldly situation where they can remain for only a few years. But they are not interested in understanding the spiritual situation of the Vaikuntha world if they are at all, they're not interested at all in the Vaikuntha world. If they are at all fortunate, they become interested in going back home, back to Godhead. But unless they understand the spiritual world, they will rot in this material darkness continuously. So this is Prabhupada speaking, not me, right? And he's being very, very emphatic here. He's not mincing his words, as we say in English. So, do we believe this? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that we really believe. Although we're initiated, although we chant Hare Krishna, we follow rules and regulations, I'm not really sure that we accept this. So think about it, especially young kids. Think about it before you engage wholeheartedly in ignorance, not in knowledge. Prabhupada's saying that we should be more interested in Vaikuntha knowledge than in mundane knowledge, because that's something that can save us. This mundane knowledge is all going to be finished when you take your last breath. And if you have not figured out or heard seriously the transcendental knowledge, you'll be confused, you'll be miserable, and you don't know what's going to happen to you next. You don't know what kind of body you're going to have in the next life. You can end up with 2 big flappy ears, a tail, 4 legs, and a wet snout, meaning a wet nose. So be careful what you think is knowledge, because if you accept bogus knowledge, you'll become bogus. If you accept real knowledge of Vaikuntha and Goloka and Krishna consciousness, you will be successful, really successful in this life. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Are there any questions? Any questions? Are you stretching your arms or going to ask a question? Stretching your arms, okay. No questions? Come on, it's got to be. You can't agree with everything I said. There must be some question.
So, Maharaj, I just wanted to know more about Jesus in the Vedic scriptures. So, could you give me some examples of where, like, he's mentioned and what's said about him?
Jesus?
Yeah.
Well, that question has been asked of Prabhupada. But I was there when Prabhupada gave a lecture on Jesus in front of 2,000 people in Salle Pleyel in Paris. And he spoke, he started quoting the Gospel of St. John. In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, right? And then he gave a whole lecture, right? And the next day, all these Christians came to the temple to speak to Prabhupada. And they were arguing with Prabhupada, about what he said. And after that, Prabhupada said, I'm not going to talk about Jesus anymore, because they're all nonsense. They don't have any acharyas anymore in their movement, and they just like to argue. So he said, don't talk about Jesus, just talk about Krishna, because we know whatever we're saying about Krishna is factual, right? Everything he said about Jesus was factual also, but they all came in and they started arguing with him, priests and ministers and so-called Christians. And he said they don't have any acharyas in their, real acharyas in their parampara. He said that therefore they just like to argue. So now there is a way to argue in Krishna consciousness. You ask questions with respect, and you wait to hear the answer. Now, I am a Christian, right? I'm born a Christian, baptized Christian. I studied the Bible. I went to church. I was a altar boy. I used to assist in all the rituals in the church. Jesus, according to Prabhupada also, is a bona fide spiritual teacher. Now the question is, do the people who claim to be Christians follow Jesus? Now this is something you can look up, and you'll see there's a lot of controversy about this, because the original teachings of Jesus are not being practiced today by the Christians. And Prabhupada gives the example over and over again, the same example. Thou shalt not kill is one of the 10 commandments. But Christians are killing on a massive basis. For Thanksgiving, they eat over 60 million turkeys in America alone. Right? Do you see the advertisement for turkeys during Thanksgiving? Who's eating all those turkeys? The Christians are eating the turkeys, right? And then the rest of the time they're eating the chickens and the fish. In fact, you can see it on the statistics there in the middle. Every year in America, 55 billion animals are being eaten. 55, and all the list of the animals that are being eaten is on that list there, right? Who's eating on them all? This is called a Christian country, isn't it? The Christians are eating them. Right? Now, there are some Christians who are vegetarian, but most of them are not. And if you say, don't eat, oh, and by the way, the Muslims also are big-time meat eaters. Is that right? Hyderabad biryani. Does it have, is it vegetarian or is it meat? Right, you see. Yesterday, one Muslim lady came to our stand, she's from Iraq, so I was talking a little bit of Arabic with her, and I explained something to her that she didn't know. She said to me, oh, we have many Armenians in Iraq also, but all their names end in Yan. I said, do you know what that means? She said, no, I don't. I said, it's the same as Ibn in Arabic. Is that right? I said, yes. Then she explained to her mother, who was an invalid, in a wheelchair. And he said, oh, he said that Ibn means son of, and like Yan in Armenian. She said, I didn't know this, right? So I taught her something she didn't know. Anyway, you see, the Arabs and the Muslims, they insist on eating meat. They think, one time, one Muslim called me up, and his son was very sick, and I suggested some things to him. And one of them was that he stop eating meat. He said, oh, no, I cannot stop. He has to eat meat. He cannot stop eating meat. So you see, the Christians, the Muslims, there's no difference between them, right? And now the Hindus, there's no difference between the Hindus, most of them, not all of them. Most of them, there's no difference between the Hindus and the Muslims and the Christians. They're all meat eaters. Whoever eats meat cannot understand anything about spiritual life. Prabhupada has made that statement, and Acharyas have made that statement also. They can't understand anything. So are the Christians, now you want to know about Jesus. Jesus was not a meat eater. He was a member of the Essene tribe in Israel or Palestine. They were vegetarians. Now, people will argue, no, that's not true. He multiplied 4 fish and 4 loaves of bread to feed 4,000 people. So that proves he ate meat. Now, that question was asked to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, if you can multiply 4 fish to feed 4,000 people, then you can eat meat also. See, all these questions have been asked of Prabhupada, right? So, no, Prabhupada keeps saying, you are a Christian, and it says, thou shalt not kill, but you are killing. Now, what do the Christians say? So, no, that doesn't mean animals. That only means human beings. Thou shalt not murder. Prabhupada said, then why don't you use the word murder? Well, now they started changing the scripture, and in the Bible, and some versions of the Bible say, thou shalt not murder. But the original Hebrew and Aramaic was, thou shalt not kill. That's the way it's been translated for 2,000 years. Now, in modern times, they're starting to change the kill to murder, because they want to make it clear that you can eat meat. So now, why did the Christians started eating meat when Jesus himself was vegetarian? It happened in the 3rd century when the Christians were able to convince the emperor of the Byzantine Empire to become a Christian. And after that, they convinced the emperor of the Roman Empire to become a Christian. So in order to keep them in Christianity and to convince them, they slackened their rules. They slackened the rules. Now, the same thing could happen in ISKCON today, I'm telling you right now. The same exact thing could happen in ISKCON. Not that they would permit meat eating, but they'll compromise, and they're beginning to compromise things that Prabhupada emphatically said not to do. And so the same thing happens. Over time, the original purity of a religion can be contaminated by changing things. That's why Prabhupada says the Western people have two big faults. One, they love to change things. And two, they're attached too much to sex. Okay. So he said that. If you want to know where he said it, I'll show it to you. And therefore, we have to be very careful about changing things or adapting things because we want to make more people so-called Krishna conscious. So there was this one devotee, he was in Amsterdam. I knew him very well. And he would always chant Hare Krishna. And if you'd say something to him, he'd say, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. He wouldn't talk back to you. He would just say, Hare Krishna, right there. So he was known for being Hare Krishna, right? So he used to go out and preach also. And there was this one place in Amsterdam, it's still there. It's a place where everything goes. Once you enter into that building, you can do anything you want, and the police won't stop you. So at that time, people were smoking marijuana, like big time, in that building. And it's a big building, right? So he went into that building, and he didn't come back to the temple at night. So the next day, when he came back, they said, well, where were you? He said, oh, I was in that building. I forget the name of it now. And I was preaching. They said, really? You were preaching? He said, yes. And so they said, well, what were you preaching? He said, I was preaching, like I always do. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And they said, well, did anything else happen? He said, well, they offered me some marijuana. So there was like a little pause, and then they said, well, what happened? Well, I smoked some also. She said, I did this so I could preach to them. You see? So this is the problem, that as soon as you compromise, your preaching is zero, right? Especially if you violate one of the regulative principles. Right? So there was another instance. Now I'm giving examples now, real examples of things that actually have happened in ISKCON. There was a group in Laguna Beach, and they were trying to enlist devotees to carry something from India to the United States. And one of those people came to France, and he came and he said, I have a lot of money, and I want to help the temple, and I want to buy a restaurant so that you can cook prasadam and distribute it to the public. So we were all excited, So they chose me to drive him around and go to different places that were for sale so that he could buy it and we would open a restaurant. So I went around with him for about 4 days, driving to different places, showing him and discussing with the real estate agents, this thing, that thing. And after the second day, he started saying things to me that I thought were a little strange. So he was saying, there are a lot of devotees in America that are making a lot of money. And it's real easy. So, I was not paying too much attention to what he was saying, because I was focused on, let's find a place so he can buy it, we can start a restaurant, right? But, the third day he became more adamant, and he said, aren't you interested in this? You can make a lot of money. So just to please him, I said, well, yes, I mean, what do you mean exactly making a lot of money? So, it's real easy. You just have to carry something from India to the United States. I said, something? Like, what do you mean something? So, it's nothing. It's just some liquid. I said, okay, what is it? Like Coca-Cola or something, or Pepsi-Cola? And no, it's a natural herbal liquid. I said, herbal liquid. Okay. Can you name what the herb is? And he gave some technical name, cannabis, this thing, that thing. So I didn't know what he meant by cannabis. I said, what is it exactly? He said, I asked. He said, well, it's some charas. I said, charas. I said, what language is that? He said, that's Hindi. I said, oh, okay. What does it mean in English? So he finally says marijuana. He said, but it's not the herb. He said, it's the liquid. I said, oh, but isn't that one of the regulative principles? You're not supposed to take intoxication. No, you don't understand. This is for Prabhupada. This is for ISKCON. This is for Jagannath. I said, oh, I see. It's for Jagannath. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, with the money, you can give it all to the temple, and they can do Jagannath Rath Yatra and buy deities. And I said, oh, okay. But it's still a violation of one of the regulative principles, isn't it? He said, come on, Prabhu. Everybody's doing it now because, it's just for the temple. So I didn't want to say no because I wanted them to buy a restaurant, right? But I went back and I told the other leaders, I said, look, this is nonsense. This guy's, he's a fraud. He's trying to enlist us. I mean, he's not going to get me, but he could get somebody else in our congregation to do this. I said, he's an illegal drug dealer. And he's claiming to be a devotee, and he's claiming a lot of people are doing this. And a lot of people were doing it. One person got caught coming from Mumbai to Denver, California. And when he went to court, he said, well, my temple president told me to do it. You see how far this goes. Now he's blaming it on ISKCON, right? So we have to be very careful to follow the regulative principles. Otherwise, we'll be a nonsense, right? And Jesus followed regulative principles. And he was a bona fide preacher. But his followers, I'm not going to say 100%, but most of them don't follow him. Therefore, the modern practice of Christianity, like the modern practice of ISKCON, if we deviate in the same way, is bogus. And we have to be very careful not to violate the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness. It doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Muslim or Hare Krishna. If you violate the rules and regulations, you're going to be in very shaky ground, and you'll fall down, and you'll make a big mess of your life. So I'll stop right there. Thank you very much for that question. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. I can't wait to go to school tomorrow. I want to hear more about God doesn't exist. Who would like to sing? If anyone wants to read this article, and there are many articles like this on the internet, it is called Self-Organization. Can we wring information from matter? Shake a bit out of it. Shake a bit out of it. It's poetry. It's like rap music here. Okay, who's going to sing? Okay, Prabhalika.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Satma.
Wait.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Satma. Bando moi savadana mate. Bando moi savadana mate. Jara prasade bai e bhava toriya jai. Krishna prapti hoy jaha hoy te. Krishna prapti hoy jaha hoy te. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya Kya. Arana Koriyo Mane Asha. Arana Koriyo Mane Asha. Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Utama Gati. Jai Prasad Pure Sarva Asha. Jai Prasad Pure Sarva Asha. चक्षुदान दिलो जे जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से. चक्षुदान दिलो जे जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से. दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो. दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो. प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते. प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते. वेद गाय जहाँ रचरितो. যাহার চরিত শিল প্রভুপাদ পতিত পাবন শ্রী গুরু করুণা সিন্ধু আধম জনার বন্ধু শ্রী গুরু করুণা সিন্ধু আধম জনার বন্ধু লোকনাথ লোকের জীবন লোকনাথ লোকের জীবন আহা প্রভু কর দয়া দেহ মোরে পাদ ছায়া আহা প্রভু কর দয়া দেহ মোরে পাদ ছায়া এবে যায় যুষক ত্রিভুবন এবে যায় যুষক ত্রিভুবন জয় প্রভুপাদা জয় প্রভুপাদা জয় প্রভুপাদা জয় প্রভুপাদা নিতাই গৌর হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল নিতাই গৌর হরি বল নমো বিষ্ণুপাদায় কৃষ্ণ প্রস্থায় ভূতলে শ্রীমতে ভক্তি বেদান্ত স্বামী ইতি নামিনে नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Nila Madhav Radha Nila Madhav Shri Radhe. Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadra. Jaya Sita Ram Jaya Sita Ram Jaya Sita Ram Jaya Lakshman Hanuman. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
The lotus feet of our spiritual master. All the three worlds. We take shelter in Lotus Street. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.